A rising industry. The rapid growth of the cybersecurity industry is resulting in greater job creation in the field. But despite the growth in the cybersecurity industry, Malaysia still lags in its production of experts, said Cybersecurity Malaysia Chief Executive Officer Dato Dr. Amiruddin Abdul Wahab. However, he said the country is aiming to produce 20,000 cybersecurity experts by 2025. Dumped and robbed. FBI is warning of a rising trend where scammers are defrauding victims via online romance scams. In an announcement, the FBI said that from January 1st, 2021 to July 31st, 2021, the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center received more than 1,800 complaints related to online romance scams, resulting in losses of approximately $133,400,000. The FBI detailed that the scammer's initial contact is typically made via dating apps and other social media sites. More Malaysians seek escape online during lockdown. TechScreener.com in an article reported that consumer engagement across all ages in Malaysia have contributed to the high internet penetration that accounts for 91.7% in. Online banking transactions have grown by 49% to 2.5 billion transactions from 1.7 billion transactions in 2019. Concurrently, e-wallet transactions have surged by 131% to about 600 million last year. $12 million worth of Bitcoin stolen in hack. Cross-chain DeFi platform P-Network has been hacked on Binance Smart Chain to the tune of approximately $12.7 million worth of Bitcoin. The company says 277 PBTC was drained from the exchange, and it was working to fix the damage by offering the hacker to keep 11.5% of the stolen Bitcoin if they return the funds. Apple addresses critical security loopholes via latest updates. Apple has rolled out a series of firmware updates for all supported devices under its ecosystem. These updates contain security-based fixes for the core graphics and WebKit vulnerabilities that potentially allows for a zero-click installation of malicious software onto affected Apple products. Nokia launches 5th generation routing silicone. As cloud infrastructures, 5G and IR 4.0 continue to drive network transformation, service providers require mission-critical IP networks to be increasingly secure, agile, and sustainable. As such, Nokia brings a new suite of IP routing solutions to the market to help service providers transform mission-critical IP networks to address these new and evolving requirements. To find out more news on cybersecurity, you can log on to our screen.
Welcome to ESPC Focus Interview Weekly Program. Today, we are discussing about another interesting topic, cybercrimes, this time cross-border. Together with us is Mr. Shafiq Daud, the Managing Director of Group IB, Asia Pacific. And allow me first to introduce about him. Mr. Shafiq Daud is an 18 years of technology veteran who receives his Bachelor of Computing and Masters of Technology from National University of Singapore. He is a United Nations scholar and a subject matter expert in cybersecurity for banks, national security and intelligence, and having worked with companies such as BAE Systems and many government agencies throughout Asia Pacific and Japan. Mr. Shafiq is consulted by many global banks, universities on matters of digital transformation and cybersecurity. And now he is the managing director of Group IB Asia Pacific, or in short, Ep8. Welcome, Mr. Shafiq. Welcome, Mr. Shafiq.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jess. We are really honored to have been invited to your show, and hopefully the audience can gain some insights on today's topic on cross-border crimes. And maybe I could start off a little bit in giving a sensing of cross-border crime, with your permission.
How do you describe the situation of cross-border cyber crimes?
Excellent. So that will be a very good question, right? Because, you know, in itself, right, cross-border crime, cyber crime itself, if you were to look at it, is quite borderless in its own nature, right? And this is why international cooperation and more timely threat intelligence is very much needed. I mean, if we look at the evolution of the tool sets being used by criminals, not only nation state and financially motivated ones, you will see that the need for having such, information, threat intelligence is vital. And in the situation of cybercrime that is on a cross-border perspective, we see it on a daily basis. We see it very much in terms of not only ransomware, in terms of data that's been breached, new tool sets that are being used from nation state or financially motivated threat actors. And this is a worrying trend. Let me give you a little bit of stats at this time. In terms of scams alone, Australia suffered last year about $850 million dollars worth of scam, while Singapore suffered 21 million of sorts. And this is being expounded and heightened on a daily basis. Ransomware criminals have gotten past the $1 billion mark just from two groups alone, Maze and ReEvil. So as you can see the state of affairs on cross-border crime, there are a lot of issues to tackle. You of all people, Professor Jazz, would know that every single one of these countries, you know, being part of academia itself, you probably consult for governments as well. And in order to understand, are we ready? Are we ready in Malaysia, for that matter, in terms of a regulatory standpoint? You know, what are the repercussions and ramifications pertaining to cross-border crime? How do we have extradition laws, for instance, in getting a threat actor, you know, into the country? Is the law in Malaysia granular enough to address all sorts of cyber crime? Because, you know, as you can tell, you know, they are different from the 80s. You know, it's not just the approaches are different. The proof points that you need in order to go to a court of law and put this on the table for prosecution is very different from what it was in the past.
What is the most challenging case or cases that you can share with us cross border?
So we do a lot of investigations in Group IB. We've done almost 1,200 plus investigations now, coupled with Ep8 investigations. It should be somewhere in the region of about 1,300. That's a lot of cases for a small group of investigators to handle. So when you talk about challenging, let's go into the non-challenging ones, where it is proven, you know, we can get enough information to address the cyber criminal, what he did, and have the evidentiary in accordance with the Evidence Act to prosecute these people. Those are the simpler ones, you know, the kiddie scripters and stuff. The most challenging, first and foremost, I would say, is threat actors that come from a different country with laws that are not necessarily, having bilateral laws of extradition, for example. And the difficulties in getting this data that you require in order to perform the prosecution. Now, for example, if one of the banks in Malaysia got hit, right, and the threat actor is within the country, it's a different story, right? You've got the purview, you've got the regulation, but on the flip side, if let's say, for example, this threat actor came from potentially, for example, just as a matter of an example, China, right? what accesses do you have in terms of that country data? We are now going into data sovereignty issues, right? And after that, we have issues of having to work in close conjunction with the law enforcement there, understanding the laws pertaining to that own country, right? Okay, now, so this is why Group IB is partnered, official partners with people like Interpol and Europol, and we've done quite a number of cases. Even in the last 1 or 2 years, we've seen a lot of publications, even in the Ep8 perspective. Challenge here is most countries, based on my experience, they will be much more interested when the threat actor is doing a lot of bad things within the country. When it comes to cross-border, we have a different type of nightmare in getting these guys to allow us to utilize the information because of data sovereignty. Who's going to give out their private data? So Interpol becomes the bridge for us. They're headquartered in Singapore. We've done a lot of different cases. We briefed them on the threat landscape. My CTO, Dmitry Volkov, even briefs the EC3 Council every quarter. And it's a matter of, like what you said earlier in our earlier conversations, Professor Jazz. This is why cooperation is necessary. This is why there is a need for affiliation. This is why there is a need for dissemination and awareness. Because after all, it is the geopolitical elements that come into play. Look at the geopolitical tensions today, as you can see, India, China, America, and so on and so forth. These things do play a part on a day-to-day basis as challenges to law enforcement, and even those people who are doing the likes of investigations and incident response like we do. Notwithstanding that, we're in a new world today. A new world where there is COVID, where travel restrictions become another issue. And like I said, these are things that are not going away anytime soon. So we have to think of more innovative ways. Right now, when you are having court proceedings can even be done on using Zoom before, that you don't even have to physically go to court, right? So you can imagine the challenges that we face in prosecution, just more latent, just delayed and takes more time. And therefore the risk exposures become higher. So governments, institutions need to have cooperation, need to have that element of sharing, even down to a TLP rate if necessary, for the purposes of protecting your own sovereign assets, your own banks, your people's data, right? This is my humble point of view.
How does you interact with Interpol in this subject?
So aside from Interpol and Europol, we have a lot of communication with local law enforcement, right? We are acting as the subject matter experts. We are subject matter experts in incident response. We are subject matter experts when it comes to investigations, because we've been doing this for 18 years now. And from our evidentiary that we collect, for example, from an incident response, we come up with conclusions. We follow the Evidence Act in accordance with the local regulatory laws. When we come to a point that the threat actor is coming on a cross-border perspective, that is when we utilize Interpol and Europol to bridge the gap, because they have the authority. They have already gotten, the necessary linkages to other foreign law enforcement, and that is where we act as the technical expertise rather than a regulatory one, because we are not a law enforcement agency ourselves.
How many employees or experts do you have to support this?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. So how Group IB is structured? So first and foremost, in 2019, we made Singapore our home. We made Singapore our global headquarters, which means everything reports back to Singapore, right? And after we opened up the Singapore office, what we did was we opened also another in Amsterdam to take care of the European market. And we are also right now just about a month back, we now have an office in Dubai as well to take care of the Middle Eastern market. We're slowly flying into other parts of the world based on cooperation, some of which deriving from law enforcement, and others based on needs of anti-piracy, digital risk protection, and cases throughout, including the likes of India and cooperation beyond, even to the western side of the hemisphere. Korea, we are expanding pretty much exponentially with a 60% growth rate of the company, and in which a lot of that is reinvested back into the company for capabilities, for resourcing. In fact, our hiring alone is exponential throughout. We started off the Singapore office with about like 4 individuals. We have about 30 over individuals right now.
Can you share with us cases that you have been working on that can be a lesson learned to our audience today?
The ones I can tell you about that have been already authorized for us to release, for example, I remembered a case by which we entitled Operation Night Fury, whereby myself and Dr. Vesta, who's one of my head of investigations, were involved in Indonesia. It was very close to us, and we worked together with the likes of Baris Krim. Baris Krim is a special unit in the police force, and we were able to catch particular suspected operators of a JavaScript sniffer. You know, we were doing a lot of research on JavaScript families, and we entitled this Get Billing. Get Billing is a particular JavaScript that was used by these threat actors. And what happened here, we worked together in close conjunction with Interpol's Director of Cybercrime, whose name is Craig Jones, and Pak Idam Wasiadi, who was the police superintendent, cyber investigator at the Baris Krim for the Indonesian police. So utilizing our skill sets along with the jurisdictional capabilities of Interpol and local law enforcement, we managed to get an arrest by giving the necessary evidentiary to the parties, and from there we were able to help with the prosecutions of 3 individuals that were responsible for this JS sniffer. That's just one case that I could recall in the earlier years. That was in 2019, not too far away. And thereafter, it began a domino effect of other cases that we did with Nigeria, and that was in November of 2020. We managed to catch a bunch of criminals that targeted at least about 50,000 victims, according to the Nigerian law enforcement. And this was a very good cooperation between Interpol, Group IB, and the Nigerian law enforcement. We managed to secure at least 3 of them as well, a 32-year-old, a 34-year-old, and a 35-year-old that were involved in what we call Operation Falcon. So it's quite an interesting job. A lot of people think that this job, it's like Hollywood, Tom Cruise and James Bond,
MIB.
MIB, hence the word GIB, So the thing is, it is a lot of technical expertise. It is about resolving the convergence between the technical proof points and the individual local regulatory frameworks, and then working in close conjunction. This is why, again, like I said, Professor Jazz, you and I are advocates of consortiums, right? Advocates of consortium. By sharing, that's the only way that's the only way you can prevent it before it happens to you. And it is a noble task that we do on a daily basis. This is what makes me wake up in the morning every day, to actually do a noble task of protecting my country, protecting my people, protecting their assets, and also preventing them from getting scammed.
Let us take a break for a while. When we come back, we will have more interesting questions to discuss with Mr. Shafiq. can you estimate like how expensive or how cheap the overall cost to solve one case, like big case like that? Any numbers that you can throw?
No, okay. So I mean, these cases, you mean in terms of a cost model to conduct an investigation? It ranges. Some investigations took Group IB 2 days. 2 days. The only reason it took 2 days instead of 1 day because some of us actually do sleep at night. So essentially, that would be very little cost. Sometimes it's not about the cost at all. We're doing a noble job, and we work in close conjunction with law enforcement to just get the job done. Now, on the flip side, if you're asking me to do an incident response that requires us to do forensics on 400 servers, right? There's a lot of time that needs to be consumed in log collection, triage, analysis, and also coming up with a final official report that can be used to regulators, right? And of course, that will cost you accordingly based on the number of man hours that are being used. Each case differs based on its complexities, requirements on a regulatory level, on a local level, for us to come about. Sometimes we're being asked to testify in a court of law as well. So to be completely honest with you, the price range can be from it being free all the way to high amounts of cost, dependent on the time it takes to do so. Some cases can even take 2 years.
Moving on, I think since you mentioned about data just now that we have technology on the cloud, I think a lot of data now is being stored in the cloud. How do you see the technology shift in relation to the crimes?
So, you and I grew up at a time where there was no such thing as clouds. The only clouds we knew of were real clouds, right? And the sun was not that hot at that time, and we can play football for 9 hours and wouldn't die. So let me put it to you this way. The cloud, when it first began, of course, created a lot of sensation, right? In terms of the ease of provisioning, in terms of a cost model perspective, it's still the same thing. It's servers, It's not like a different technology altogether. The problem is people still do not really have a good clarity of what the cloud is, and that's why the fear. The fact that you can host the cloud from any country as well. Look at Amazon, Azure, Google, also creates that unnecessary fear. These powerhouses might take my information, might copy my information, so on and so on. The state of affairs of cloud today is very different from what it was many years ago. It is relatively way much safer than it was, and we have learned also by falling down. Group IB even utilizes certain technologies because we are aware of the shift towards the cloud based on cost modeling. So answering your question about the cloud, do I find that it is safe? Yes, it depends on which is the cloud provider, how you use it, what kind of data you're storing, what kind of applications you're using, what is the security process that you utilize, what frameworks you utilize, what kind of line and sector of business you're in. So you can imagine that the huge amount of categories and questions and variables, permutations, combinations required to answer that question. But I would personally say the cloud is much safer than it was many, many years back.
Can you give a very fatherly advice, useful advice to our audience, how to stay safe online?
So first and foremost, as an individual or a company, you need to know the basics, right? You need to know what is even things like phishing. You need to know how to attend to scams that even extend itself to even phone calls. Every other day I get a phone call. Hello, you are required to attend high court. And amongst other things like your bank account has already been locked. And so on and so on. You need to understand that there are more and more of these scammers. You need to educate your family, especially those in the elder generation. In terms of a corporate perspective, you need to move away from the old draconian thought processes by which a firewall, an IPS, an IDS, an SIEM are said to have enough of maturity in my security stack. No, you need to understand that threat intelligence here is now getting more and more vital. People are only starting to understand what threat intelligence is, threat intelligence and attribution. You need to look again at your entire security posture. Without the threat intelligence, you don't know what kind of attacks are happening in your sector, in your country, in your demographic, in your overall region, and globally. So it needs good security personnel to take a look at it in a holistic manner, down to patch management, down to breach data. You know, for example, Dr. Jess, if you own an e-commerce company, right? You got no control over your clients who log in. You got no rights over their mobile phone. You got no rights about what they do in their own time in their own home computer. And this is where the data starts getting breached. So instead of focusing on just the data breach component, understand how data breach can lead to initial access, can lead to recon strategies, can lead you to have failures. So if you don't know, then you will not be able to take action. So it's a chicken and the egg there. Secondly, by looking at threat intelligence and seeing how it impacts the different industries, then you will realize that no industry is safe. For example, ransomware. Whether you're a bank, whether you're a government, whether you're a small SME, you still are susceptible to ransomware, right? Based on affiliate programs and all. So what we need to do is educate, Professor Jazz. We need to educate. We need to have more campaigns, and we need governmental intervention for a national scale of such an education. You know, across different verticals, across different areas, from banking to e-commerce. That's what I would say is my so-called, I wouldn't say fatherly advice, I'm not that old, but I would say this is my take on what we need to do to protect the country, our people, and also our overall assets.
Thank you very much for this wonderful insight from Mr. Shafiq Daud, Group IB. If you have any feedback, do email us at the email address shown on the screen. Check us out on our social media platform, and do like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Till then, see you around the next time in the next episode. Be safe online.